So hey anime fans. The series name is What If Naruto Got Harem with the Incredible. So let's start the series. Their strikes are producing a power shockwave. The strength of both attacks appeared to be equal. One does not dominate the other. Then all of a sudden, their core energy vanished. As Naruto scratched his friend's headband, his friend used the occasion to launch an attack into Naruto's heart. When the enormous ball of core energy exploded, it destroyed a portion of the valley. But something did occur. Dimensional rifts opened as a result of both strikes being excessively strong. Upon noticing this, a buddy of Naruto seized him by the neck and hurled him into the rift, which was about to close. It created a huge shock wave as it closed, sending Naruto's friend flying into a wall and rendering him unconscious. The sixth head master showed up just as everything had calmed down. He searched the area for his two students, but only found one. "I was too late," he stated solemnly. When Naruto woke, his first realization was that he was no longer in the Valley of the End. A hospital, perfect, he thought contemptuously as he peered around, seeing only white walls and medical equipment. Observing the wires on his body, he swiftly cut them off, sending all the apparatus into disarray. Ignoring it, he gazed out the window, only to have his eyes open in disbelief as he saw all the tall buildings and cars. "Where the hell am I?" he exclaimed. Naruto decided to leave after hearing footsteps running down the corridor towards his room. He picked up his possessions from the chair next to him and leaped out the window. Fortunately, Naruto was on the second story and only landed on some grass when he realized he couldn't use core energy to descend the building. A doctor said, "There he is!" as he peered out of Naruto's hospital room. Naruto chose a direction at random and ran, deciding that this was not the time to figure out why he couldn't use core energy. He eventually ran into an alley and hid behind a dumpster before he calmed down. "Okay, I'm in a village that I don't know, and there are huge buildings that are bigger than the ones in the Rain Village, or at least the pictures I've seen, and now I'm hiding from people that probably want to torture me for answers," he said aloud, then shrugged. "Still nicer than the village." He looked down at himself and noticed that he was still wearing a hospital gown. He removed it without waiting and put on his orange jumpsuit pants. But he was only able to find the shirt and not the coat. "At least I have that," he mumbled as he put it on. He sighed as he looked at the headband and then pocketed it. He went outside and explored the streets, looking in awe of everything, as he had nothing else to do. A doctor hurried around a corner and said, "Where did he go? He has to be around here somewhere." Fortunately, Naruto heard him and swiftly turned away. "There!" exclaimed the doctor as he saw Naruto round a corner. Naruto cried out, "Damn!" and started to run once more. He hurried into a dead end after spotting another alley. "Maybe they won't find me here?" he asked. He heard, "He went into the alley! There's no way out!" as though everything were against him. Naruto yelled, "Now that's just not fair!" before attempting to find a way out. All he could see was a tiny vent that seemed barely big enough for him. Naruto figured it was better than nothing when he heard the doctor and others approaching, so he rushed to the vent and attempted to pry the grate off, but it refused to budge. After grabbing onto the top of it, he leaped and slammed his feet on the grate, but to no avail. Naruto threw all of his power into kicking the gate as the footsteps grew louder. Naruto gritted his teeth and attempted one final kick. Something happened as soon as his boots reached the grate, and he ended up on his back on the building's roof. "What the hell?" he moaned, not anticipating anything of the sort. Naruto sighed and took a seat to collect his thoughts on what had transpired. He looked at the vent, trying to figure out how he got from the ground to the roof in a split second. He stood up once more, approached it, and examined it from every side. "How did I do it?" he wondered himself before he sat on top of it. "Was it the kicking?" Ultimately, he decided to give it a shot, standing on the vent and jumping up and down several times to try to see himself passing through it. He thought, "Perhaps I could try something like channeling my core energy." After 10 minutes had passed with no action, he stood and focused, sighing. It's better than doing nothing. He nodded to himself and leaped in a matter of seconds. He saw smoke emerge from him this time, pushing his body back through the vent and to the bottom. This time, though, it continued until he crashed into the wall across from him. Well, at least that worked, Nuda mumbled as he pulled away from the wall. I'll test this theory later, he mumbled as he left the alley and headed in a different random route. This is going to be fun, he said, raising an eyebrow at his hands before turning back to the vent. The following day, while exploring the city, Nudu was able to commit the location to memory and navigate around with ease. He went to the public library to learn more about the city he was in, which he discovered was known as Metroville. He studied several books and spent hours indoors studying everything he could. He also wished he could have used shadow clones at that time. He was reminded of his new skills and how he was able to vent when he thought about that. He left the library after a few more hours and strolled around the city. After a while he found himself in an open field and noticed that it was isolated, so he nodded to himself. Nuda quickly located a few bushes to practice with while he stared intently. Just like last time, he thought. Channel my energy and pass through the bush. He nodded to himself and darted toward the bush. Unfortunately, a dog barking nearby caused Nudu to lose focus, forcing him to crash into the tree and the shrub. Why? He said comically as he stood up. A female voice shouted, Help! From close by. On autopilot, Nudu sprinted as quickly as he could to the voice's origin upon hearing this. When he finally reached the end of another alley, he saw a man mugging a woman. Unconsciously using his new abilities, Nudu snarled and ran towards the man, knocking him against the wall. Get away from her! Nudu yelled as he stepped in front of the man. The man stumbled a little before getting to his feet and shaking his head. Get lost, kid! He murmured, turning to face Nudu. This doesn't concern you, Nudu said. Like hell it does! As he charged the man. However, he was unable to escape as quickly due to his diminished core energy, and the man backhanded him, sending him into the side of a trash. Nudu heard the woman scream as the man began to march toward her, struggling to stand. Nudu noticed some chains hanging from the dumpster while searching for anything that could assist him. Nudu quickly grabbed it and flung the chain at the man, unwittingly using his powers once more. Wisps of smoke rose from the chain, which blazed red and black, then struck the man across the chest, knocking him unconscious as he flew into a wall. He turned slowly and approached the woman, panting heavily from what had just transpired. Are you all right? He murmured, gathering his breath, not realizing that the chain had wrapped itself around his wrist. Thank you, she cried. Thank you so much! Fortunately, the woman saw nothing as she nodded while crying. No problem, Nid answered, helping the woman to her feet. Did he hurt you? He asked. Find out more. Amazing. Services for streaming movies online. Shelves for books. Books. Reserve. The Incredibles. Fanfiction. Fanfiction merchandise with a brand. Fanfiction books. Web hosting for authors. I think it might be broken, she replied, pointing to her left leg while standing on her right. I need to call the police and ambulance, she said, taking a phone from her bag that was laying next to her. Ambulance, what's that? Nuda pinched his brows. He thought bewilderedly. Before speaking to it, he observed the woman pressing a few buttons. A few minutes later, Nuda heard a few loud noises that were approaching closer till he noticed 2 cars. As another person asked Nuda and the woman some questions, a group of people in various uniforms ran into the alley. For a while, Nuda had to lie about his abilities since, to be honest, he was irritated by all the queries. After the questioning were finished, a second guy approached Nuda. Can I help you? Nuda inquired, glancing at the elderly man. He looked around and said, "Yes, my name is Rick Dicker. May I talk to you privately?" Naruto gazed at the man for a bit before nodding slowly. "As I mentioned before, my name is Rick Dicker. I work for a government called the National Supers Agency. I had a talk with the man that is being arrested, and he told me what he saw," they stated as they approached a deserted street. Naruto was becoming anxious now. What did he see?" he asked. "That you had powers," Rick said, staring directly into Naruto's eyes. He halted as Naruto started offering illogical justifications, saying, "Try to deny it all you want. We have ways of seeing anything, and we saw you use your powers." "Alright, what do you want?" Naruto groaned, realizing there was no need in lying any longer. When the man said, "I want to know where you came from," Naruto sighed once more before he explained what he knew and where he came from. "I'm getting too old for this," Rick moaned. "A few days ago, you never existed. We have never seen you before. But yesterday, you showed up out of nowhere." "So what's going to happen now?" Naruto asked Rick. Sighing, Rick responded, "Well, I'm going to have to either set you up in an orphanage, but that might not end well, so I'll put you in an apartment. The government will handle the rent and bills, so don't worry. I'll also have to send you to school, otherwise you'd be the only 14-year-old who doesn't go to school, and you'll be going in a couple of days. We'll give you a test tomorrow to see what grade you should be. This will also give you chance to know about this world and everything about it." Naruto looked at the man and grinned slightly, thinking, "He's just like old man headmaster." Rick brought Naruto to a tiny limo and said, "Now follow me, your apartment was already set up. We had it ready for when we would meet." Shortly after they started driving, they spotted a huge skyscraper with enormous windows. "I forgot to ask, but do you have any questions? It must seem odd that a complete stranger is helping you out of the blue," they said as they entered an elevator. "Are you going to keep my powers a secret? I'd rather no one knew about this," Naruto asked after nodding and giving it some thought. Rick arched an eyebrow and questioned, "What about other supers? People with powers like you?" Rick said after noticing a perplexed expression on the face of the word. "Yeah, for now at least. Wait, there are others like me?" he added, nodding once more. After the elevator opened and they entered a pleasant-looking hallway, Rick said, "There are others. In fact, the person you'll be living across from is also a super." He then took out a key and opened a door, saying, "This is now your home." At first glance, Naruto could easily conclude that the apartment was superior to the one in Hyde Ninja Village. Rick informed him that it was larger than Naruto's last flat, with 2 bedrooms, a bathroom, and a kitchen that connected to the living area. Another room existed, but it was unoccupied, and Naruto was informed that he could do whatever he wanted with it. "Any more questions?" "Yes," Naruto replied. "Where's the ramen?" After 2 days, Naruto went shopping for new clothes after being shown around his apartment, and handed a modest amount of money. He is now dressed in black jeans with his headband turned into a belt, black and orange shoes, a short orange shirt with sleeves that fall just past his elbows, and a short-sleeved black hoodie. It seems that very few people were aware that the chains were fastened around his wrist. He went into his kitchen, picked up an apple, put on his shoes, and picked up a black satchel that contained schoolbooks. He waved to Lucius, his neighbor, as he exited his flat and locked it. They hit it off right away after meeting the other day, joking and supporting one another whenever they can. Naruto thought about his abilities as he made his way to the school after leaving the apartment complex, saying, "I still need to train in them." As he entered the school grounds, he thought, "I don't want to accidentally turn into smoke and cause a panic." He noticed that the building was named Western View Junior High. As he entered, the school's receptionist welcomed him and said, "Hello there, how can I help you?" Find out more. The Incredibles. services for streaming movies online. Books. Amazing. Shelves for books. Fanfiction. Reserve. External hard disks. Writing guides for fanfiction. Creating prompt generators. Naruto took the piece of paper from his backpack, remembering that he was supposed to give her a page. I was told to give this to you and that you would give me my locker and class number, he said. The woman picked up the paper and skimmed through it. Okay, Mr. Uzumaki, nice name, she replied after nodding and typing a few words into her computer. Your class is just down the hall. Give your teacher this note and he'll let you in, she continued, pointing down the hallway, which caused Naruto to grin sheepishly and rub the back of his head. She handed him another sheet of paper with his class number and locker information on it. Naruto chose to go to class first as it was almost time for lunch, and it only took him a few minutes to get there. Everyone in the classroom fell silent as he knocked on the door, unlocked it, and walked in. Can I help you? The teacher inquired. He handed the note to the instructor quickly and said, All right, before turning to face the class and saying, We have a new student joining us today. He then turned to Naruto and added, Why don't you introduce yourself to everyone? My name is Naruto Uzumaki, glad to be here, Naruto said, nodding and turning to face the class. Ignoring the students muttering about the new boy, the instructor responded, Good. The only seat we have available is at the back. Violet, could you please raise your hand to help Naruto here to his seat? She said. Naruto could see where he was supposed to walk when he glanced at the back and saw a hand tentatively lift into the air. People whispering, he has to sit next to her. Or, I feel sorry for him, being stuck to sit next to Invisigirl, could be heard as Naruto walked to it. He sat down and turned to face Violet, the girl he was sitting next to. She had black hair that nearly hid her face and was dressed in thick dark blue jeans. Naruto would claim that she was attractive and that she was attempting to hide her appearance if he didn't know any better. Naruto said hi to the girl, who gave him a startled look and asked, What? Nothing, she said quietly, turning away with a slight flush. As the students went on with their conversation, Naruto observed the sympathetic looks he received. As he listened to some of their remarks, he noticed that some of them were making Violet wince, which infuriated him. He heard the bell ring before he could act, and he saw everyone hastily gather their bags and depart. Violet was already gone when he glanced at her, so he shrugged and walked away. Naruto went outside and surveyed his surroundings before noticing a tree that no one else seemed to be aware of. He approached it and ascended till he was perched on a big branch that he realized was hidden from everyone else's view. Naruto went through his luggage, pulled out his lunch, and began to eat while perusing some of his strange books. Eventually, Naruto heard a noise, so he walked along the branch and pushed aside some leaves to have a look. He noticed that two females were making fun of Violet. Why am I so angry? He said. He tightened his teeth and thought. He noticed a few wisps of smoke floating around his palm and had to calm himself. After inhaling deeply, Naruto dropped his bag and leaped down the tree, approaching the gathering of girls and growling. What the hell are you doing? Don't worry, we're just telling her to stay away from you, one girl stated haughtily as the other two followed. You should be thanking us. Naruto took another long breath and gritted his teeth in rage. Get lost before I do something that I won't regret, he said. Luckily, the girls promptly fled after receiving the letter. As he approached Violet and made her realize that he was slightly taller than her, he noticed that she was once more looking at him in disbelief. You okay? He asked. Violet nodded, then became aware that she was staring. Violet blushed profusely and covered her face with her hair. Thank you, she said shyly. After giving it some thought, Naruto could see that Violet had few, if any, friends. That would imply that she most likely eats by herself as well. Would you like to have lunch with me? Naruto inquired, grinning, and gestured to the tree where he was eating. Violet was shocked once more and was unable to do anything except nod as she attempted to comprehend the events of the previous 5 minutes. Naruto ascended first before assisting Violet as they made their way to the trio. Both became close friends and gained a lot of knowledge about one another at lunch. Violet discovered that Naruto is an orphan who lives alone in an apartment, enjoys ramen and oranges, dislikes vegetables, and is bullied. Naruto discovered that Violet dislikes bullies and being different, enjoys reading and music, and has 2 brothers and parents. They talked throughout the remainder of the day without anyone noticing, even after lunch finished and they returned to class. Both went outside when the bell announced the end of the day. For some reason, Violet didn't respond as she usually did when she saw her crush pass by, which confused her. They kept talking until a car passed them both, and Violet groaned, realizing it was hers. "Bye, Naruto," she smiled. As she got into her car, he replied, "I'll see you tomorrow." He saw that someone, whom he assumed to be the mother, was staring at him with a gaze that made Naruto uncomfortable, as if there would be a lot of pointless taunting. He shook his head and left, without listening to the conversation inside the car. "So, who was that?" Violet's mother Helen questioned in a tone that made Violet a little uneasy. "He, just transferred and we became friends," Violet answered, avoiding eye contact with her mother. Violet blushed in shame as Helen responded, "Really?" with an annoying smirk. "So, what's his name?" Violet said Naruto, after giving her mother a quick glance. "With Naruto." Naruto kept grinning as he made his way back to his flat. He had recently made his first friend, at least the first person his age. She was attractive, he had to admit. Naruto stopped abruptly and pondered the origin of that thinking before shrugging and carrying on. When Naruto arrived at his flat, he hung up his bag and grinned. "Now would be perfect for training my powers," he thought to himself as he strolled all the way back to the wide field he had been in the previous day. When he got there, he moved some bushes and checked to make sure there was no dog or anyone else. He stood a couple of yards away, focused on the bush. He waited until there was complete silence before sprinting ahead. He plunged ahead just before the bush, watching in wonder as his body transformed into embers and smoke and passed through it. His body was reconstituted on the other side, and he couldn't contain his smile. "That was awesome," he said with pleasure. He spent hours on the field until the sun disappeared. "You got here late," Lucius said, glancing at Naruto from his door as he walked slowly and wearily home. "What were you doing?" Lucius said. "Training," Naruto said. "You know, like exercise." He then shut the door to his apartment. He prepared his dinner with a sigh and headed directly to bed. After 2 weeks. Over the last 2 weeks, not much has transpired. Naruto persisted in attending classes and hanging out with his pal Violet. Throughout that period, the two became even closer. Without the other person's knowledge, they even developed crushes on one another. As a result, when Violet would blush and behave shyly while they were by themselves, Naruto became extremely perplexed. Even now, many have attempted to speak with both of them, but most of them have been dismissed because they are girls attempting to steal Naruto from Violet. Even if it perplexed him, Naruto discovered at that time that Violet could be rather possessive. Additionally, Naruto continued honing his abilities over the course of the 2 weeks and made a few, mostly unintentional, discoveries. He discovered that he could shoot ash balls and absorb smoke to acquire some strength. Additionally, he can smoke dash farther, but it requires a lot of energy. He was currently on his way to Violet's house because he had been invited over for supper by the family. He stood anxiously and rang the doorbell. He felt that something was going to happen because this would be the first time he would be meeting his crush's family. He didn't have to wait long to hear a small kid say, "I'll get it." The door opened to reveal a 10-year-old boy with blue eyes and blonde hair. "Hi, are you Naruto?" he inquired, grinning mischievously. After a brief glance at him, Nerda thought. I can already tell he'll make an excellent prankster. As a number of sinister schemes began to shape in his mind. Yeah, he responded, grinning after shaking his head, and then he went inside. I'm Dash, the 10-year-old introduced himself. Nerda said, Nice to meet you, as two more people came in. After seeing the woman a few times in her car, he realized she was the mother, but she was also carrying a baby. Due to his stature, Nerda gasped at the other man. In addition to having blue eyes and blonde hair, he was really large. Hello, my name is Helen. This is my youngest son, Jack, she began, holding the infant in her arms. And this is my husband, Bob. The man's gaze was what most alarmed Nerda. She pushed her husband to greet the teenager. So you are my daughter's friend? Bob asked, reaching forward to shake hands with the boy. And nice to meet you, sir, Nerda said, reluctantly raising his own hand and clasping it with the older guy. His left eye twitched as he felt Bob's palm squeeze his quite cruelly. Squeezing Bob's hand with all of his remaining might, Nerda refused to be outdone. When Bob sensed this, he grinned and let go of Dash, calling his son. Go get your sister. Dash swiftly moved toward Violet's room while being mindful of his abilities. Helen said, Please come sit at the table. I'll go get the food. Nerda nodded and proceeded to the table, where he sat down with Bob at his heels. Helen brought in some food, and Nerda drooled at the sight of it while they sat in silence. Violet, who appeared to be as anxious as Nerda and was attempting to tuck her hair behind her left ear, followed Dash as he entered. Hi, remarked Nerda, grinning, and Violet smiled back. Not knowing what to say, Nerda remained silent during the supper, and Violet was experiencing the same thing. So, how did you and Violet meet? Helen inquired as she glanced at Nerda, making him anxious. At that point, everyone stopped eating and turned to stare at Nerda before turning to gaze at Violet, who was flushed. She saw that her hands were invisible when she glanced down at them, so she inhaled deeply to make them visible once more. Before responding, On my first day I was to sit next to her. Nerda sat tensely. With the exception of Violet, everyone waited for Nerda to continue, but he didn't. That's it? Helen questioned in shock. Mom cautioned Violet, but her daughter ignored her. We didn't really talk, but during lunch I saw Violet being bullied by a few girls. I scared them off and we became friends after that. Nerda added, sighing as he saw everyone's responses. Helen smiled and teased him. Bob appeared irate but at least grateful to him, and Dash didn't seem to give a damn, although Nerda could tell he was at least somewhat appreciative. When Nerda finally turned to face Violet, he could see that he was attempting to focus on something else, but it was difficult because of her flush. The malicious sneer on Dash's lips went unnoticed until he spoke up, drawing everyone's attention. Violet was saved by the one she loves, Nerda said, blushing in shame and turning away in terror at Bob's intense glare. Dash started giggling, and Jack followed suit. But it was Violet's response that attracted Nerda's attention and caused everyone to go silent. As soon as Dash uttered those words, she vanished from view except for her clothing and fled the room. After exchanging glances and glancing at Nerdu, Bob and Helen scowled at Dash. Whoops! A very sheepish Dash asked. With a weary and dejected sigh, Bob turned to Nerdu and said, I guess you're wondering why she turned invisible, fearing that this may force his family to move once more. Everyone was surprised until Nerdu remarked, Don't worry. I'll keep it a secret, we all have our secrets. However, Violet wasn't around, so he inquired, So you guys are all supers? And received nods. Dash said, I run fast, as he dashed around the table, pleased to demonstrate his abilities. This shocked Nerdu. Do you two have powers? He asked the parents, thinking, when he's older he could be as fast as Lee without the weights. Rather than responding, Bob used one hand to raise the table, and Helen reached across to him. Whoa, was all Nerda could utter. You're really going to keep this a secret? Why? Helen said Nerda as Bob sat down after setting the table down. Like I said, we all have our secrets, Nerda said with a smile. Is it okay if I go see Violet? He asked, glancing around. Bob's quick response of, no, caused Helen to give him a fierce look. Bob, cautioned Helen, causing Bob to perspire a little before turning away. Helen nodded toward the corridor and grinned at Nerda. It's the second door to the left, she remarked. Nerda said thank you, and walked out of the room. Grinning, he strolled down the hall and examined all of the family pictures. In just a few seconds he arrived at the second door and waited for an unknown reason. He inhaled deeply, knocked twice, and bided his time. He knocked again, but nothing occurred. He grabbed the doorknob, turned it, and opened the door. He glanced around the room and realized that it was a typical girl's room. There are numerous fashion magazines and books scattered over the room, posters on the wall, and a sizable wardrobe filled with clothing. Violet was seated on the bed with her knees on her chest when he noticed it. Are you all right? He inquired, observing that Violet winced. Without glancing at him, she said, What are you doing here? Did he come to make fun of me now? Sadly, she thought. Violet was glad he couldn't see her face since he would have been able to see her blush. Nerda shook his head, even though Violet couldn't see it. I just came to see if you were all right. You ran away earlier and I got concerned. Violet reluctantly raised her head to meet Nerda's gaze. Before taking a seat beside her, he thought. So this is what she meant by afraid of being different. He recognized the dread in her eyes from his own background. They were at a loss for words and remained silent for some minutes. That is, until Violet interrupted the silence with a slightly trembling voice, asking, Are you afraid of me? No, replied Nerda with a grin on his face. I know what it's like being different, so I know it can be terrifying at times. Your family explained everything to me. He then laughed. Now that I know you can turn invisible, it explains why I thought I saw you randomly for a second but then you disappear the next. Violet grinned. I told your family that I would keep this a secret. Why? She inquired, taken aback by his actions. But then again, he is Nerdu, she reasoned. He grinned and remarked, As I told your family, even I have my secrets. Now let's go back to your family, he said, getting to his feet and taking her hand in his. Violet mumbled, Thank you, as they walked back, and Nerda hardly heard her. The remainder of the evening was spent in tranquility. Despite the disclosure of the family secret, everyone was content and felt as though a burden had been removed. Because of this, Nerda and Violet even became closer. Nerdu bid the family farewell when it was time to depart, and was informed that he was welcome to visit at any moment. Without anyone noticing, Violet embraced Nerdu and planted a kiss on his cheek before rushing inside in shame. Nerdu stood for a time in a stupor, then grinned and shook his head before making his way back to his flat by taking the vents as a shortcut. The following day. For Nerdu, it was just another day. He got up, went about his daily business, left his flat, attended school, and spent time with Violet. He let out a sigh, hoping that something would happen. He was about to pull a practical joke when the bell rang and everyone departed. While Nerdu walked to his locker, Violet waited outside. He noticed his pal standing anxiously by the stairs as he was leaving the building. With a cunning thought, he approached her cautiously from the stairs, relieved that she was facing away from him, and then took hold of her shoulders. She let go of all her books and let out a little scream before swiftly ducking and becoming invisible. That wasn't funny, she said, turning visible when she heard laughter. Just keeping you on your toes, he remarked, then glanced about. It's a good thing no one saw. When he noticed that she had returned to her tense state, he asked, Are you okay? Violet's face was flushed, so she just looked at her feet once again without turning to face Nerdu. As she said, I was wondering if. She started picking up her books in an attempt to find something to divert her attention. As Nerda assisted by taking up the last book, he pleaded, If. She was about to say, If you would all like to have dash, when a horn sounded, indicating that her family was waiting for her. She gave Nerda a defeated sigh and muttered, I'll see you tomorrow, before bolting off. Wonder what she was going to say? Nerda mumbled as he stood there speechless, then remembered that he still had one of her books. I'll give it to her after I do my training tonight, he thought, and turned to leave. Nerda went directly to his field and started training there rather than heading to the apartment. He unwound his chain, decided to practice with it, and focused his skills on it before slicing at a tree. I was out here for a while, was his response when he finally realized the time had passed. He had done this without realizing that it was now dark outside. After gathering his belongings, he took another stroll home while savoring the refreshing cool air. Tires suddenly sounded as someone exclaimed with delight. Fire! Yeah! Nerda looked and watched a car rush by him. He asked out loud, Was that Bob and Lucius? Before noticing a second car. Suspicious, he sprinted to an alley and, under his new moniker, Smoke Dash, sprinted into a vent and emerged on a roof. With his powers, Nerdu was able to keep up with both cars with ease. Well, it's obvious the one behind Bob and Lucius is tailing them, he thought, but then he noticed a fire in the distance. Oh! That's why he shouted fire, said Nerdu with a relieved sigh. For a moment I thought he was going to try and start one. Now that he knew where they were going, he swiftly smoke dashed towards the building and unintentionally crashed through the roof. Got to work on those brakes, he moaned as he stood there. He looked around and noticed that the smoke was so thick that it was difficult to see anything. He continued to do this as he walked to a window and watched Bob and Lucius run into the building while wearing masks. Well, it's obvious that they are going to get everyone out of here, but the fire is too much, he said. I'd better help, he thought as he began to absorb more smoke. After some time, Nida descended the stairs and heard Bob and Lucius yelling. Is that everybody? Lucius exclaimed while carrying a few individuals. Bob ran up to him more and more. Yeah, that's everyone, Bob yelled back. Lucius exclaimed. It better be, as a portion of the roof above them fell. Nothing happened when he pointed his hand toward the fire. Incredulous, Bob said. Can't you put this out? When Lucius yelled, I can't lay a layer thick enough. It's evaporating too fast. Nida rolled his eyes. Ignoring the quarreling adults, Nida raced to a wall and examined it, thinking, this should do for an escape, before sprinting back to a wall that separated him from Bob and Lucius. Before anyone could see him, he swiftly smoke dashed away after unraveling his chain and slashing it. The building began to collapse with Nida still inside. I know I wish for something to happen, but this is ridiculous, he said before using smoke dash onto the rooftop of another building. A moment later, Bob ran at the wall and knocked his and Lucius's way through. Good, now they're gone. He could hear alarms going off from a jewelry store close to the collapsed building from where he was standing on the roof. Additionally, he watched Bob and Lucius drive away, so he followed them to their vehicle and kept going after it as it drove away, noting that the following vehicle had vanished. Bob stated, Thanks for the lift, as he exited the vehicle at his residence. Bob went into the home while Lucius nodded and drove off. Nerdu was preparing to head out when he thought of Violet's book and decided to go to the window where her room located. Fortunately, it was open, allowing him to turn and smoke before going inside. He must have got caught, he thought to himself as he hastily wrote a message and left, just as the door opened, after noticing that she wasn't in the room and that there was shouting. Walking to her bed, Violet yawned. She considered going to bed because she was exhausted and upset with herself for not asking Nerdu out on a date. Maybe I'll have a better chance tomorrow, she thought. But when she noticed a book with a letter on top that wasn't there before, she paused. She took it and read aloud. Vi, you dropped this today after school, so I brought it back to you. See you at school tomorrow. A chibi drawing of Naruto making a peace sign was at the bottom of the note. Grinning, she took up the book and kept the letter near her. As she put it away, she casually noticed that it smelled like smoke, but she didn't give it any thought. Then, without realizing that Naruto was watching from the window, she placed the note in the drawer and went to bed. The following day. Before the teacher began the session, Naruto and Violet were sitting in his classroom as usual, chatting about unrelated topics. As the day went on, we now see the two teenagers eating lunch in their tree. So what are you planning for the holidays that are coming in a few months? Naruto inquired while he was eating his lunch. As she ate her lunch, Violet shrugged and said, I don't know. What about you? Same, was his bored response. Violet's eyes opened as she reached for her final bite of lunch, remembering something. Oh, my mom invited you over for dinner again tonight, she said, smiling, hoping he would attend. Violet grinned and said, Here they come. Naruto grinned and nodded, looking through the trees. Sounds nice. I'll come, and since I haven't got anything else to do later today, I'll just go with you to your home after school. When Violet spotted Tony riding her, one of the most popular guys at school, and the females who were bullying her, she stared and rolled her eyes. Naruto was the other, although he didn't really care about popularity, and chose to disregard everything. Violet has been aware of Tony's occasional haughtiness and lack of concern for other people ever since she got over her crush on him. She questioned suspiciously, What are you planning? Yet her smile indicated that she wasn't opposed. After grinning, Naruto displayed a bucket filled with water balloons and many bags of flour. How did you hide that? She asked, raising an eyebrow. Violet didn't even need to respond when she accepted a balloon. Naruto simply glanced at her and asked, Do you want it or not? Tony was teasing the three girls, more interested in their appearance than their words. He kept flirting with the females while walking beneath a tree that he knew very few people ever approached. Balloons rained down on all four of them in an instant, causing Tony to shout in surprise and the girls to shriek. They all assumed it was over when the balloons abruptly stopped, but then they all looked up at the tree, realizing that's where it originated. Tony yelled, Who did that? But got no response. Violet and Naruto approached them from behind with two large bags of flour, but none of them saw them. They created a dense flour cloud as they dropped them on the gullible teenagers. Violet and Naruto both fled right away in case they were seen, but they joined a group when many others arrived to witness the event. Everyone started laughing when they saw the four well-liked teenagers covered in paste after the cloud cleared. The bell also rang at that moment, forcing everyone inside, leaving the four teams embarrassed and furious. A few of the teachers spent the remainder of the day trying to identify the perpetrator, but nobody was able to do so. They dropped the situation after realizing there was nothing they could do and that there were no cameras around. However, Tony and the girls continued to be upset about everything. Naruto and Violet were standing outside laughing at what had transpired at the end of the school day. After a short while, they paused and continued talking until Dash called Violet's name. Violet replied to her mother, Naruto says he can join us for dinner, as they both approached the car and climbed inside. Helen grinned and said, That's great, upon hearing this. Wanting her mother to say yes, Violet inquired, Is it okay if Naruto can come to our house? He says he's got nothing else to do today. Dash, can you sit next to Jack, please? Naruto needs to sit down, Helen said to her son without giving it any thought. Dash was going to complain, but he changed his mind as he climbed to the rear. As the car went back to the Par's house, Violet stepped aside and Naruto joined her. Dash simply raced to his room to perform arbitrary things after they had all entered the house. As they placed the food in the kitchen, Naruto assisted Violet and Helen with their shopping. Following that, Nerda and Violet sat down to complete their assignments before simply chatting. Violet said, "I forgot to ask you something," recalling the book on her bed. "How did you get this to my room?" she queried suspiciously as she displayed the book to Nerda. Nerda began to perspire as she gazed, anticipating a response. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. The bell then saved him as Bob answered the door, looking defeated. "Are you okay?" Bob asked Nerda worriedly, but he was actually relieved to avoid the subject. After narrowing her eyes at that, Violet ended the call, but not before vowing to ask him again shortly. Bob entered his workroom right away without saying anything. At this, Nerda narrowed his eyes and turned to face his friend. "I'm just going to go to the bathroom," he said, getting up. Violet returned to watching TV after nodding. Seeing a door close, he turned to go and went down the corridor. He pushed his ear on the door out of curiosity and listened till he heard a robotic voice. Without wasting any more time, he transformed into smoke, flew beneath the door, and disappeared into the darkness. He observed Bob taking notes, while they both listened to a tablet featuring a woman with silver hair. When they heard Helen, they both moaned, but they kept listening until the message ended. Nerdu observed Bob looking longingly at the wall, which was filled with artifacts from his heroic days. After a minute, the tablet printed a card, which Bob took. Then, both Bob and Nerdu heard the machine declare, "This message will self-destruct." When they heard this, they had only one thing to say. "Oh!" There was a big boom, but it was too quiet for anyone inside the home to hear. In order to keep the smoke detectors from going off, Bob fled the room due to the excessive amount of smoke, and Nerdu's smoke dashed away as he absorbed it. After letting out a sigh of relief when the sprinklers failed to activate, Bob started to reflect on what had transpired. Violet was reading a magazine when Nerdu returned to the living room. Something didn't feel right, so he decided to follow Bob, knowing that he would accept the task of destroying the robot. "I just remembered something," he murmured, attracting Violet's attention. "What?" Violet put down her magazine and inquired. "I do have plans for this weekend, or possibly all of next week," Nerdu replied with a sad smile. "It's just to visit an old friend in another city." "That's terrific," Violet remarked, attempting to sound joyful, and then she put on a phony smile that Nerdu could clearly see through. "When do you leave?" she inquired. "Within the next couple of days," he replied, frowning at the blatantly phony smile. "If not, it will most likely be next week." "Dinner is ready," said Helen from the kitchen. Without saying anything, Violet rose from her chair and entered the dining room, Nerdu trailing behind. "Why do I have a feeling that something's going to happen and that it will either end in a good or a very, very, very bad way?" Nerdu groaned. Next week. As he did his best to hang on to the aircraft that Bob was inside, Nerdu was grateful that he had been able to obtain a black blouse to which he had fastened a mask, exactly like his former sensei's sixth headmaster. "Why am I doing this?" he shouted to himself as the wind kept smacking his face repeatedly. It was like this for a few hours until they eventually came across an island that Nerdu had to admit did look beautiful. He was cut off from his thoughts when he heard a hatch open. Looking over the edge of the aircraft, he saw a large black pod fly out before catching a glimpse of what was inside. "Bob? Wait, how am I supposed to land?" he mumbled before leaping off as well. He shouted as he fell after the pod that now had propellers to slow itself down. For a few minutes, Nerdu continued to fall until he saw the pod fly into the trees. Think, he thought to himself, how am I supposed to land? A light bulb then went off in his head when he remembered his powers. He got closer and closer to the ground until suddenly he was jerked upwards slightly, and then he saw that he was slowly descending to the ground. Looking at how that was happening, he saw that he was shooting off a continuous amount of smoke from his hands until he finally reached the ground. "I think I'll call that smoke thrusters," he said before nodding to himself. When Nerdu heard a loud noise, he looked and went to the location. When he got there, he almost passed out laughing when he saw Bob straining to escape the pod. "Come on," Bob complained, then sighed and retreated within the pod, leaving Naruto perplexed until Bob's strength caused the capsule's 3 sides to blow outward. He can lift cars, smash buildings, and throw anything he picks up, but he can't pull himself out of small spaces, Naruto thought with a little chuckle, before considering his own weakness. Then again, I can't use my powers in water. As he looked at Bob again, Naruto had to bite his lip to keep from laughing as the older man stretched, demonstrating that he was too big for his old hero suit. After that, Bob started jogging in an arbitrary direction, and Naruto followed, either from a distance or from the trees. They had to stop 4 or 5 times because Bob was not as fit as he used to be, which annoyed Naruto because he could still continue easily. Finally, they had to stop again while Naruto was lying down on a tree, not seeing Bob look at a big mark on the ground in a tree, when a huge round robot with 4 legs suddenly appeared, surprising both of them. Bob dodged the robot's legs, but was too slow to avoid a minor scrape on his left arm before jumping over the robot and punching it to the opposite side of the clearing. When Bob watched the robot stand up and charge at him, he mumbled, trying hard not to jump into the fight. Naruto thought, "I'd better stay out of the way. But that doesn't mean I can't help. But how am I to do that without Bob noticing me?" he asked himself, looking around, as he watched Bob jump over the robot again. But as soon as he reached the apex, the robot caught him easily and threw him away. Unfortunately, he was thrown into a tree that Naruto was on, causing it to topple over. He watched as the robot retracted its legs, rolled into a few more trees, and then rolled after Bob. The robot chased the man through the forest, and Naruto actually struggled to keep up until they all reached a large chasm. He stayed at the edge and watched as Bob dived off with the robot following him. In some way, the robot got ahead of Bob as he dove to the side, then threw large rocks at him. He avoided the first 2, but the third one caught him, slamming him against the wall. When Bob saw a claw about to impale him, he jumped to the side, avoiding it as it slammed into the wall. In an attempt to flee, Bob never saw the robot jump into the air and then slam into the ground, knocking him off the edge of a chasm before following after. Naruto cursed before jumping down, thinking he should intervene soon, and when he reached the bottom, he saw Bob being slowly pushed towards lava by the robot. Without thinking, Naruto charged a cinder shot at the machine, distracting it for a brief moment. Bob used that as he pushed forward, causing the robot's claw to fly into the lava. Naruto swiftly hid behind some rocks in case he saw but was not. Bob yelled as he started laughing, then abruptly turned to his left. Naruto really winced when he heard a loud snap emanating from Bob's back. "Ouch," muttered Naruto before widening his eyes when he saw the robot smash through the ground, showing that it was glowing because it was heated to extremely high degrees. Because the robot smashed through the ground, it caused it to split into multiple parts, with Bob in the middle of a large crack. Both he and Naruto watched as the robot reveal its claws before making them spin. Choosing between the spinning claws or the slowly floating away rock, Bob chose the safer one and jumped, even though his back was causing a lot of pain. However, this didn't stop the machine from picking him up by his legs and slam him into the ground a few times. It then grabbed his arms with another claw and tried to pull him apart. Naruto was about to jump in and help again, but stopped when he heard another crack and Bob to start laughing. He then watched as he pulled on the claw, ripping it from the robot's appendage. Dropping to the ground, Bob ran under the robot as it moved its head to under itself. Bob then ripped it off before climbing inside. Naruto watched in morbid fascination as the robot began to stab itself to try and catch the man. It then stopped and its head shot off, showing Bob as it tapped its side. He then climbed back inside as the robot reached inside and accidentally pulled out its own heart. Bob jumped out and walked away, leaving the now dead robot behind. Naruto followed after, either realizing that they were being watched. Later that night, Naruto went out to the island to see how the security was. He didn't have to follow Bob because he was simply going to dinner with the man who owned the island, and Mirage was the one who first spoke to Bob about all of this. "Why does this seem so odd?" Naruto asked himself as he looked around, thinking about how the people here found Bob and his hero identity, as well as how the island needs such heavy security. It almost seemed planned, but it can't be. He scoffed to himself as he landed on a beach after jumping through trees. Then again, I should always look underneath the underneath. He then sighed as he stopped in a large cave, thinking about everything that had happened. In order to avoid raising suspicions, Naruto made sure to return a few days after Bob. He continued to visit Violet over the next few months, noting that she was happy to see him again, but also seemed angry about something he didn't know. On other occasions, he followed and saw that Bob was working out and spending time with his children, and on one occasion, he even walked to the house and blinked when he saw two cars, one red and one black, though he didn't understand why the red one had a bow on top until he discovered it was a gift for Helen. Since it was the last day before the holiday began, everyone at school was happy. At the moment, he was staring at Violet in complete confusion as they ate their lunch in their school tree. The reason he was staring at Violet in confusion was because every time he left to follow her father, she would appear depressed, and then, when he returned, she would act irrationally and avoid talking to him, which was beginning to irritate him. "Did I do something incorrectly?" asked Naruto, trying to figure out the problem. Violet just shook her head, answering but not talking as she took a bite from her sandwich. "Then why aren't you taking to me?" With a loud voice, he asked. When he watched her shrug, his left eye twitched. "You don't need to shout," Violet murmured amusedly, blushing when she saw Naruto gape at her. "What?" She could see floods of relief streaming from his eyes as he pointed at her, saying, "You talk to me." At that, Violet just turned away from him. "Damn it!" For the next few minutes, Violet tried to finish off some extra work but sighed in frustration. "You okay?" Naruto inquired. "I can't figure some of this out," she replied, closing her book. "Need assistance?" "Please," she continued. "You are welcome to join us at my house. However, due to a meeting with an old acquaintance, my mother won't be picking us up today and won't return till later." Naruto nodded, and the bell rang. "Besides, it's not that far, so we can just walk, but we have to go to Dash's school first, which is fortunately a couple blocks away." After returning to class and working for the next few hours, they left the school and started walking in the direction of Dash's. They found him in front of the building, looking really bored, and once they got him, they started walking through a park towards the house. As Violet mentioned, it didn't take long for them to reach the house, where they did random things. Dash just watched TV, while Naruto worked with Violet on their homework. Helen entered the house shortly after, and only Naruto noticed that she was carrying a duffel bag. "Why was your mom carrying a duffel bag?" Naruto's question caused the other two to pause and consider. Violet stood up to investigate what was going on, but before she could say anything, Helen said, "You can reheat a lot of leftovers. I should be back tonight, so make sure Dash finishes his homework and you both go to bed on time," she stated gravely. "Late. That's how long you can be in charge, isn't it?" "Sure, but why am I in command?" Unaware that Naruto was listening from down the corridor, Violet asked in bewilderment. Helen replied, "Nothing. Just a little trouble with Daddy." Violet raised an eyebrow in response, asking, "You mean that Dad is the problem or that Dad is in trouble?" Helen groaned as she opened her duffel bag and pulled out 3 red uniforms she had purchased from Edna Mode, a suit designer for supers, after saying angrily, "I mean he's either in trouble or he's gonna be," before shutting the door to her bedroom so she could pack. Regretfully, Dash asked, "What's that?" as he opened the bedroom door. "Mom, where did you get that?" Helen stretched her arm and slammed the door shut. In response, Dash just ran out of the house and to the bedroom window. "You built a cool outfit? Are those intended for us? We all get cool outfits," he said as Helen closed the blinds, forcing him to rush to another window. Helen shut the blinds, but she was unprepared for Dash to dash in, open the door, and grab a suit. Dash, you return here now! She shouted, but he didn't listen. Sighing, Helen went to the phone after hearing it ring. Hey, Snug. Thank you for responding. Despite the short notice, I hope to be able to. What are these? Violet interrupted her mother's phone call to inquire this as she came into the room and picked up a suit. They kind of look like Bob's suit, but it's red instead of blue. She said that Bob's in trouble or is going to be, so that must mean something happened if she's going after. Nerd mused, narrowing his brows as he glanced at the suit just behind her. Look, I'm the Dash, Dash remarked as he started to adore himself in the mirror. The Dash likes. As he ran into the room wearing the red outfit Nerda had spotted had an eye on it. Remove that before someone notices you, Helen replied with a hint of rage. You're packing one just like it, Violet said, casting a suspicious glance at her mother. Are you concealing something? After sneaking up behind Helen and snatching the suit out of her hands, Dash ran behind Violet and stated, This is yours, pointing out that it was custom manufactured. I have to pack because you're not coming, Helen sighed and sagged against the door, shouting as she literally pushed her kids and Nerda out of her chamber. Violet, on the other hand, glanced over the suit before turning to face her brother. What do you think is unique about it? She inquired. Dash said, I don't know. Why'd Mom attempt to hide it? He responded with a question before bolting. They look like super suits, or at least the one your dad has, Violet and Nerda said, glancing at one another. Try something, Nerda suggested. Violet simply nodded and made her hand invisible. She touched it slowly, and both of them were startled when the suit also became invisible. Violet was especially surprised because Nerda was anticipating a response. You and Dash are going to follow her, aren't you? Probably, Violet said. I'll call a babysitter, Nerda murmured, turning around with a sigh. After a few hours, Helen was flying a fast-moving jet over an ocean while seated in the pilot's seat. She pressed a few buttons and said into the headset she was wearing, Island approach. Checking in is the India Golf 99er. VRF above. Island Tower, this is India Golf 99er making a request for vectors to the initial. She waited for a response, but nothing came. Once more, she received no answer. Suddenly, her gaze fell on the duffel bag resting on the bench beside her. She got up, pressed the autopilot button, went to the plane's restroom, emerged in the suit a few moments later, threw the duffel bag onto another seat, but halted when she heard, "I'll go, Violet!" When Helen recognized the voice, she yelled. Violet became visible and said, "It's not my fault. We came outside to investigate your strange behavior." Dash concurred with Violet as he hurried to the seat behind. You left Jack and Nerd alone, then? Helen questioned, but then she noticed Nerd get up from a nearby seat and say, You left him alone? Nerd responded, I called a sitter, and took a seat beside Violet. Who? Before Nerd responded and she went to the phone, Helen asked. Violet said, I wonder where are we going? As he stared out the window, and Nerd shrugged. Then, everyone's attention was interrupted by a beeping sound. Before gasping and downing the blind guards, India Golf 99er headset, Helen hurried up to her seat and glanced at the radar. Disengage, repeat. Flipping a switch, a sign shone, telling everyone to put their seatbelts on. Looking out of the window, Nerd's eyes widened when he saw rockets fly towards them and that the jet just released some flares. Helen made a sharp turn and because no one had their seatbelts on, they were lifted off their seats. Dash was fine because he held on, but Nerdo had to catch Violet before she hit her head and used his feet to hold himself on the seat in front of them. The plan continued to spin as two rockets slammed into each other, exploding. The plane stopped spinning but was now heading towards the water and Helen just managed to pull up on time. Using the thrusts, the plane shot forward, slamming everyone back to their seats. Helen tried to get the people on the island to call off the missiles, but no luck. Turning, she shouted to her daughter, Vi, encircle the aircraft with a force field. However, you warned us against using our abilities, a frightened Violet yelled back, and Naruto tried to reassure her by placing a hand on her shoulder. I am aware of what I said, but pay attention to what I'm saying now, Helen yelled. She continued to try and get the people to abort, and Violet tried to put up a force field but no luck, as there was too much pressure. Seeing that the missiles were getting too close, Naruto quickly grabbed Dash and Violet and held them as Helen did the same, but she extended her body to protect them. The plane exploded, sending everything towards the ocean. Helen was unconscious due to the explosion, but everyone else was awake. Dash and Violet were screaming, but Naruto was looking around to see if there was something he could do. As everyone was distracted, he slowed his descent by using his smoke thrusters and grabbed onto a large piece of debris. Helen quickly woke up and saw that they were all falling. She quickly grabbed her children and stretched her body to that of a parachute. Brace yourselves, as they all fell into the sea, Helen yelled. Where is Naruto? Violet questioned, surveying her surroundings. Before plunging her kids into the water, Helen looked up and gasped, saying, Watch out! She shouted as she too ducked to avoid a large piece of debris, slamming into the water. What no one saw though was that Naruto used his powers to launch himself towards that piece of debris before kicking it with all his strength. It may not have done much, but it did divert it slightly so it missed everyone else. He then quickly dived into the water as to avoid questions as how he got onto the debris, even though the water weakened him. When he surfaced, he saw that Violet and Dash were shouting out before Helen splashed them with water. Shut up! Now both of you get a grip, we're not going to die, she yelled. What will we do now, then? Naruto inquired. After a brief period of silence, Helen turned to face the direction of the missiles and said, Those were land-based, short-range missiles. That's our best option. You want us to go after those who attempted to murder us? Dash inquired. If it means land, then yes. Do you think we'll go swimming there? Violet inquired. I expect you to trust me, Helen said with a sly smile. Shaping herself into the shape of a small boat, she continued. Naruto, Vi, you both climb on. I need you to push Dash. With your speed, we'll be there soon. Everyone nodded and followed instructions, and they set out. They traveled in quiet for several hours until they arrived at a beach where Helen and Dash passed down from tiredness. I'm proud of you, she told her son, who grinned in response. It was dark when Naruto looked about, so he said, We need to set up camp. A cave or something will do, he said, lying. I think I saw one when he swam here. Everyone agreed, and they all went in the direction he indicated until they came to a large, isolated cave. They made a fire and just sat there, trying to calm themselves down. Violet and Dash were contemplating what had happened. Helen was trying to think of a way to tell her children the truth, and Naruto was wondering if he was going to reveal his powers. Chances are I will, he thought. Naruto, said Helen, drawing the older blonde's attention. Will you please wait outside the cave for a few minutes? After Naruto nodded and walked away, she continued, I need to talk to my kids in private. I think your father is in trouble. She sighed. So, I'm going to look for him. Until I return, Naruto will be in control. What? Dash yelled. Not fazed, Violet grinned and said, You heard her. Put these on, Helen urged, pulling 3 masks from her duffel bag. Your identity is your most valuable possession. Violet took her own mask, but she chose not to wear it. And if anything goes wrong, use your powers, Dash said, grinning. Protect it. Violet started to say, But you said Dash, but was cut off. I am aware of what I said. Before inhaling deeply, Helen yelled, Remember the villains on those Saturday morning shows you used to watch? These guys aren't like those guys, though. Because of your kids, they won't apply self-control. If they have the chance, they will kill you, she stated gravely. So don't give them that chance. I'm depending on your strength, Vi. Mom dash. Helen told her daughter to be strong before turning to face her son. Dash, I want you to run as fast as you can if anything goes wrong, she said. As quickly as I can? Dash said again. Helen grinned and replied, as quickly as you can. Keep each other safe and stay hidden. Helen turned and fled the cave after hugging them and said, I'll be back by morning. She saw Naruto sitting on a tree and said, I'm sorry that you're here. Don't be, Naruto answered, adding, I would have come regardless of anything. He then remarked, nice mask, complimenting it. I wish you had one, replied Helen. At least that way no one will be able to identify you. Naruto simply grinned and said, no problem, before raising his own mask, which covered his hood and the bottom portion of his face. I'm glad I had this attached. Anyway, I know you don't have any powers, but please, help them any way you can, Helen said with a simple shake of her head. When Violet emerged from the cave, Naruto nodded and simply stood aside. Mom, she whispered sorrowfully. What happened on the plane? I am sorry. Tears started to well up in her eyes, but they didn't fall. I wanted to help, but when you asked me to, I'm sorry. Helen smiled softly and shushed her daughter, saying, It's not your fault. I shouldn't have asked you for so much at once. However, things have changed since then, and skepticism is now a luxury we cannot afford, my love. You don't realize how powerful you are. Don't worry and don't think. She pushed some of Violet's hair behind her ear and fled, saying, You'll know what to do when the time comes. As Naruto emerged from the tree he was on, Violet remained in her spot. She's right, you know, he said, drawing her attention. All you have to do is believe in yourself and protect those you care about, then you will be stronger. He then left Violet alone in her thoughts and returned to the cave. Violet considered what her mother and Naruto had said as she looked down at the mask in her hands. After a minute, she put the mask on and grinned before entering the cave as well, where she saw Naruto lying on the ground and Dash appearing bored once more. Violet sat next to Naruto in the fire and started practicing using her force fields. Dash got up after observing her for a few minutes. Well, not that this isn't fun, but I'm gonna go look around, he remarked, picking up a stick that had a flame on top. What do you suppose is happening here? Did you think we were on vacation? Violet said rhetorically. The lives of Mom and Dad might be in danger. Finally, she muttered. Or worse, their marriage. Their union? Violet nodded. So the bad guys are trying to wreck Mom and Dad's marriage. Dash repeated, not really believing it. Violet frowned and said, Forget it. You're so immature. I'm gonna go look around, Dash said, nodding to himself as he turned around. Violet remarked, Mom said to stay hidden? I refused to leave the cave, Dash yelled back as he proceeded to venture more into the cavern. Despite everything, Violet couldn't help but be grateful that he was with her. Do you think this is going to affect my parents' marriage? She said, sighing at her brother before turning to Naruto. In humiliation, she asked. After giving her a quick glance, Naruto thought, I'll admit that this could be a bump on the road, but I doubt it could be anything serious, so you don't have to worry. He then narrowed his eyes and noted, You know, this is weird, as he stared at the deeper portion of the cave. What? What makes this cave so deep? By now, Dash ought to have arrived at the end. Additionally, he pointed to the cave and remarked, Most are round, almost like a circle, but this is more oval. As they considered it, either of them said, Vi. They heard Dash's voice echoing, And as they looked, they noticed that the cave's end was beginning to glow before Dash came and began dragging them to the exit. They were able to escape the cave as fire erupted from it, destroying everything, and they all turned to look at the volcano when they heard a noise and saw a rocket shoot out of it. "Come on, we need to find a place to rest for the night," Naruto said, sighing, looking at the others. They nodded and followed him until they finally came to a tiny clearing. Dash leaned against a tree and fell asleep quickly, while Naruto leaned against another tree, and Violet joined him there. "You okay?" With concern, he inquired. "I'm all right, thanks, just tired," she said with a smile and a nod. "Then rest," Naruto said softly, grinning as he watched Violet's eyes grow heavy and close. "Good night." Violet fell asleep, her head resting on his shoulder, and Naruto did nothing until he put an arm around her and closed his eyes, finding this to be quite peaceful. The following morning, Dash was the first to wake up as he stretched, and as he looked around, memories of yesterday came back to him as he gazed at the forest in wonder. Since he only saw it at night, he hardly saw any of it, so it looked completely different to him during the day. Naruto woke up shortly after, but he didn't get up because he felt a light weight on his chest, and when he looked down, he saw Violet cuddling up to him with a small, happy smile. He thought, "What the hell? That was everywhere when I was on this island before, and I can't figure out what kind it is." The words, "Identification, please," caused Naruto's eyes to enlarge. "Vi, wake up," he shouted, shaking the girl while maintaining eye contact with the bird. "We must relocate immediately." Violet woke up groggily, rubbed her eyes, and then turned to Naruto. When she looked around, she noticed that she was lying on him, which made her eep and leap off. "I'm so sorry," she uttered the words loudly. Naruto remarked, "It's all right." And he would be lying if he claimed not to appreciate it. Violet followed his eyes after noticing he was staring at something, and she saw the blue bird. "Voice key incorrect," the bird remarked. "Why does it say that?" Dash inquired. "Voice key incorrect," was what it said once more before its eyes turned red and it opened its beak to reveal a speaker before a loud alarm went off, causing them all to cover their ears in agony. Naruto then reached into his hoodie, pulled out a shuriken, and threw it, killing the bird and its alarm, but it was too late because more alarms went off. In this manner, the three began to run deeper into the forest after Naruto seized Violet's hand and said, but they had to stop when they came to another clearing because a group of uniformed men with guns jumped off their vehicles and aimed at them. Violet whispered to Dash, "Remember what Mom said," as the men surrounded them. Dash glanced at her sister bewildered and shouted, "Run!" Even though it was clear what she meant, he realized it and fled into the forest, followed by a couple. "Show yourself!" Violet said, becoming invisible. As he searched for her, one of the guards gave the order, and the final guard approached Naruto, always pointing his gun at him. He warned, "Don't you do anything," which made Naruto smirk. As he approached, he grabbed the gun and pushed it, causing it to swat the guard in the face. "I am so thankful I read up on guns," he thought as he began to dismantle the gun, rendering it useless. Seeing the guard approaching, he grabbed his fist and punched the man in the gut, causing him to double over. He then leaped up and spun, easily knocking him out. He turned to Violet and noticed that a guard was still searching for her, and that a floating stick was behind him. The man said, "I know you're there, little miss, disappear," before the stick struck him in the back of his head. Thinking the fight was over, Violet turned visible again, but the guard knocked her off her feet. The man rolled to his gun, aimed at her, and fired, but missed as she fled, invisible. He followed her as she ran, and he saw a splash in a pond. Unaware of her exact location, he picked up some dirt and threw it in, causing it to flow into the water and revealing her location. "There you are," he said, ready to murder the teenage girl. "Hey!" shouted Naruto as he used his chain and wrapped it around the guard's throat, forcing him to stop and try and free his throat. Yanking on the chain, the man was thrown onto the ground, releasing him from the chain, letting him gasp for air. Violet used that to run out of the water and hide behind a tree, and Dash appeared nearby. When the man quickly caught his breath, he reached for his gun and aimed at Naruto, before seeing Dash and fired at him. Violet and Naruto reacted and dove in front, but Violet's instincts went off, allowing her to create a stable force field around her and her brother. Naruto was just outside it, but the force field was between him and the guard. "I told you you could do it, said Naruto with a smile. "How do you manage that?" Dash exclaimed with astonishment. "I don't know," was Violet's equally startled response. Naruto got an idea and yelled, "Vi, keep up the force field! You run, Dash! I'll go along!" They nodded, even though they knew he couldn't run as fast as them. Dash began to run inside the force field, making it roll in a direction. Naruto ran beside them until they kept getting further away. When he was alone, he smirked. "Finally," he said, aiming his hands at the guard that was following. Using his powers, he used a smoke shot, knocking the man unconscious. Quickly running up a tree, he began to smoke dash his way through the forest, following the direction the others went in and the noise of gunfire. After a few minutes, he came out to the end of the forest, seeing the entire Par family, minus Jack of course, surrounded by guards and their flying vehicles. Without thinking, he jumped down in front of everyone and concentrated his power into his chain, causing it to glow red and have smoke wisps around it. Everyone's eyes widened as they saw Naruto use the chain to slice through one of the guards' vehicle, before putting the chain away and firing smoke shots at the ones on the ground. Seeing one fly towards Naruto from behind, Bob quickly punched it to the ground, and Helen stretched her leg and kicked one off. There was only one left, and Naruto saw the only vehicle on the ground. "Hey!" To grab Bob's attention, he yelled. "Throw that at me!" The combat ended when Bob paused before following instructions, and Naruto coiled his chain around it, allowing his strength to flow through it before smashing into another. "You possess abilities!" When everyone had calmed down enough to reflect, Violet yelled to Naruto, "Why didn't you tell me?" Naruto was at a loss for words. Think, he thought to himself, trying to come up with an excuse that would help, but it didn't work. He narrowed his eyes and said, "I'll explain later, there's more coming." As if on cue, more guards appeared, but this time the family and Naruto were ready. Dash ran around the family, creating a tornado of dust, before one of them fired at the cloud of dust before it left, revealing Violet using her force fields to block the bullets. Two more guards approached from behind her, but Helen kicked one of them away, and Naruto's smoke sprinted past the second guard before grabbing him from behind and slamming him into the ground. Another guard was aimed at Helen, but Bob grabbed him and punched him. Just as they were about to do more, two blue lasers appeared out of nowhere, one paralyzing Bob and Helen, while the other paralyzed Dash, Violet, and Violet. "Whoa! Whoa! Whoa!" shouted a new voice. From the corner of his eye, Naruto saw that it was a man that wore a black and white suit with a large S on the front and also had long orange hair that pointed upwards. "Time out!" With a nasty sneer, he yelled. "What have we got here? Uniforms that match?" he said as he moved them together before chuckling darkly. "Elastigirl? Elastigirl, you married her?" His eyes then became wide. "And got busy! A whole family of supers! Apart from the smoky one," Naruto said, his eyes widening. "Yeah, I am aware of you. When you followed Mr. Incredible here and snuck around my base, you were captured on video. After some time, Naruto and the Pars were brought to the cell block, where they were all given metal spheres to wear on their wrists and feet to keep them in the air," Naruto said. "I have an itch." But either nobody heard him, or they disregarded him. The news, which was broadcast on the now famous Syndrome to everyone but Bob, showed Metroville and the fact that a huge object had fallen into it. "Oh, come on! You have to admit, this is awesome," he yelled. "The robot will appear spectacularly and cause some harm, much as in a movie." crowds of people yelling. And Syndrome will come to the rescue precisely when all else seems hopeless. I'm going to be a greater hero than you ever were, he said, turning to stare at Bob. You mean you eliminated actual heroes in order to pose as one? Angrily, Bob asked. I am real, Syndrome declared, turning around and glaring at Bob once again. Real enough to beat you. And I accomplished it without your priceless talents or your incredibly unique abilities. They'll get heroics from me, the most amazing heroics anyone has ever witnessed. And I'll sell all of my inventions when I'm elderly and have had my fill of fun so that everyone can be superheroes. He stopped as he started to grin evilly as he was leaving, then scowled. No one will be. After saying, and when everyone's super. Bob sighed and lowered his head in shame, saying, I'm sorry, this is all my fault. Everyone watched the news as the robot, which they discovered was named Omnidroid, started invading the city and destroying the army. I've been a terrible dad. He then turned to Helen, failing to see Violet envelop herself in a force field, preventing her from becoming confined, and failing to watch Naruto transform into smoke and emerge behind Violet. Blind to what I have, so obsessed with being undervalued that I undervalued all of you, he said. Dad, Dash remarked, but Helen silenced him. He trailed off. So caught up in the past that I. Violet and Naruto were at the controls now. You were my greatest adventure, and I nearly missed it, he said. However, I promise that I will securely get us out of this situation. Violet interrupted him to say, Well, I think Dad has made some excellent progress today, but I think it's time we wind down now. She then pressed a button that released everyone from their shackles. Bob remarked, We need to get back to the mainland, as they all dashed along a hallway. Before they reached a door, Helen commented, I believe there is an airplane hangar directly ahead. After opening it, Bob looked around, perplexed, asking, Where are all the guards? They all went into the hangar, and Naruto said, Celebrating. And some are in that van, I think, he said, and everyone ran up to it. Sulfur bomb, he whispered as he created a little ball of smoke, and the guards in the van popped the cork on a bottle of champagne, which Bob caught. Naruto threw the ball inside as Bob closed the door, and when he heard coughing, he opened it again before going inside and beating them until they passed out. They all hurried along the hangar when he emerged, saying, This is the right hangar, but I don't see any jets. Bob remarked, A jet's not fast enough. Helen looked at him curiously and said, What's faster than a jet? Hey! How about a rocket? Exclaimed Dash, drawing everyone's attention. Everyone saw a rocket prepared and ready to take off as they ran up to him. I can't fly a rocket, Helen said. Great. You don't have to, replied Violet. Just use the coordinates from the last launch. Before Bob scowled and said, Wait, I'd bet Syndrome changed the password by now. Everyone grinned at the concept. How can we access the computer? Say please came from a voice, and they looked up to see Mirage grinning down at them from a window. Soon after, another rocket was passing over the ocean and getting closer to Metroville. It broke apart, revealing a black glider with a kin on it, and Helen carrying the van while she held onto the glider. Bob was seated in the driver's seat of the van, with the others seated behind him. Dash was bored and asked, Are we there yet? He inquired. In frustration, Bob responded, We get there when we get there. And then he opened the window, causing all the paper to fly everywhere. How are you, honey? In order for his wife to hear, he yelled. Am I required to respond? She responded with a yell. Kids, buckle up like I told you, Bob said as they approached the city. Dash and Violet immediately went to their seats and fastened their seat belts, while Naruto clung desperately to the table in front of him. Ready, Violet? He asked, seeing Violet ready to press a button. Now! With that, Violet slammed the button, making the glider split. Helen shouted out before letting go of both halves of the glider and quickly climbing inside the van. "This is gonna be rough." After then, he stepped on the pedal, causing the van to crash onto the road before it continued to move. "The robot is in the financial district. Which exit?" "Traction Avenue," was Helen's response. Bob remarked. "That will take me downtown." "What about 7th? He leaned the automobile in the direction of that exit and inquired. "Avoid taking 7th place," Helen yelled, forcing Bob to pull over. Bob scowled and remarked mockingly, "Great! We missed it." "You asked me how to get there, and I told you," Helen replied. "Exit at Traction." Bob remarked, "That will take me downtown," as the vehicle began to approach the exit. Helen shouted, "Get in the right lane, it's coming up," as she noticed the exit. "Give the signal." "At Traction, we don't leave." "You will miss it." As they drove down, avoiding cars that were close to them, Bob shouted in frustration and swerved the van. Violet screamed as Bob tried to control the vehicle by slamming both feet down onto the brakes, which caused the back wheels to stop. The van turned to its side before tumbling across the road, and it continued to tumble until it finally stopped, conveniently stopping in a parking space in a perfect parallel parking arrangement. Bob inhaled deeply before turning to inquire, "Is everyone okay back there?" "Super duper, Dad," Violet exclaimed, laughing. Dash laughed and added, "Let's do that again." Seeing the curious expressions, Naruto responded, "I got knocked out of the van when it started tumbling." "How about no?" he asked as he got into the car, seeming irritated if his twitching eye was any clue. "Fortunately, I was able to prevent myself from getting hurt by using my abilities," he said. When the Omnidroid suddenly appeared, everyone turned to face the van. "Wait here and stay hidden," Bob ordered. "I'm going in." After Helen stopped him, he got out of the car. "And I watch helplessly from the sidelines?" angrily she asked. As they argued, Naruto thought to himself, "They're having an argument now?" They could have been battling the Omnidroid by now, but they weren't. Looking at Bob, Naruto realized that he was nearing his breaking point. "I can't let you go again!" he shouted, picking his wife up before sighing and gently placing her on the ground. "I can't. Never again. I'm not powerful enough." Unsure of what to say, Helen kissed him for a moment before stopping and saying, "If we work together, we won't have to." When the Omnidroid finally noticed them and destroyed the vehicle, Violet's screams startled everyone out of their reverie. She sounded like Haku there, Naruto reflected, recalling the things that were told to him and that he believed. Only Bob and Helen survived their attempt to flee for safety. "Vi! Hurry!" "No!" As it attacked, she shouted. The Omnidroid struck the barrier a few times, but it did nothing, so it slammed its entire body down on it, shattering it. Violet was blown back and briefly lost consciousness. Violet quickly put up a force field, but it was causing her a lot of stress as she attempted to protect Naruto and Dash. Naruto yelled as he saw the Omnidroid about to slam its body once more. Bob quickly intervened, using his strength to stop it. Helen pulled her children out, Smoke dashed to the other side of it, and started firing some shots at it, but nothing worked. He was then whacked aside as Bob was picked up and thrown through a building, searching for the original Incredible, which Bob then body-slammed onto the ground. "Freeze!" he yelled, causing Naruto to turn and notice a new man utilizing ice. "Wait, ice?" he asked aloud, then his eyes widened as he recognized the person as Lucius. He smirked and muttered, "I bet his wife is not happy with him," before he chuckled and squirmed when he saw the man get smacked into a car. He watched as Bob was struck like he did into a building, and then the enormous machine chased Helen with energy bolts. The remote for schizophrenia. With a gadget in his palm, Bob yelled. At that, Naruto grimaced. Don't yell it out! Shouted Naruto before seeing Bob get picked up and pressing a few buttons. The Omnidroid's entire arm was then ejected off of its body. Thinking he could try and get it from the inside, Naruto's smoke dashed to the Omnidroid, but as soon as he got close, it reverted into its ball form and rolled away. It knows my powers. So Syndrome did see me use my powers. He must have known about my vent dash then, he thought with a curse before dodging an energy bolt. He saw that Bob had thrown the remote to Dash, who was running away to get the remote further from the Omnidroid. Looking at the robot, he aimed at its gun before firing, but it kept missing, not being fast enough to hit it. The gun was then destroyed as Helen threw a sewer cover at it, just as Frozone helped Dash. But that didn't stop the robot to roll after them and then jump high into the air before slamming into the water that was in the city's par, creating a massive wave that threw Dash and Frozone away. Both Naruto and Bob saw the remote land on the ground and both ran after it. Just as Bob reached it, the Omnidroid fired one of its claws, capturing Bob, who, in turn, grabbed onto Naruto by accident, sending them to the end of the road. Frozone froze the ground as Naruto attempted to free Bob from the claw, and Helen tripped the Omnidroid onto its side, giving Violet the remote control. Violet pressed a few buttons before the Omnidroid's rockets at the end of its claws caused it to fly into a building. Dash grabbed the remote control and pressed a button, but nothing happened to the robot. Instead, the claw that had trapped Bob exploded, sending him and Naruto hurtling. We can't stop it, Bob said, attracting Naruto's attention. The only thing that can penetrate it is. He stopped, widened his eyes, and then looked at the claw itself. That won't be enough, Naruto remarked. I can assist, but you have to toss that item when I say, okay. Helen took the remote and hit a button that caused the claw's end to convert into rockets, while Bob simply nodded as he picked up the claw. Smoke started to swirl about Naruto as he focused. Helen pressed another button, but that stopped the rocket. Bob murmured, "Wait a minute," before yelling at his wife. "Press that button again." Hearing him, Helen did as she was told but didn't know what button, so she guessed, causing the claw to begin to rotate like a drill. "No! The first one, the other one." "I got the first button." As she prepared to hit the button, she shouted back. As the robot approached, Frozone's attempt to halt it failed. "Press it!" Bob yelled. "Not just yet," Helen yelled back. "We need to make this matter because you only have one chance." Naruto blasted up into the air as the Omnidroid approached, then yelled, "Now!" right as Helen hit the button down to Bob. "Duck, everybody!" Bob yelled as he let go of the claw, which flew in the direction of the Omnidroid. With a spinning ball of smoke in his hands, Naruto reached the pinnacle of his flight and dove directly for the machine, the claw slamming through the Omnidroid and taking its heart with it. Orbital Rasengan! After shouting, Naruto slammed the Omnidroid all the way through, from head to ground, and everything fell silent for a moment before shattering on the ocean. After everything had subsided, Naruto approached Lucius and the Par family. Bob said "Hey Zone" to his pal. Before recognizing Naruto, Lucius chuckled. "Who is this?" Not recognizing him, he asked. Naruto lowered his mask slightly and spoke the words. "You know, your wife is going to kill you." As a throng gathered around them and cheered, Lucius murmured, "Naruto," shaking his head, and said, "She'll nag at me later. Remind me of old times," he remarked, making Bob chuckle and slap his back. "Yeah," he said, winced. "Hurt then too." On a building, Syndrome glared down at people without anyone noticing and then took off. After 1 hour. "You're from a different planet, and you've only been using your abilities for a few months?" As everyone listened to Naruto's narrative, Violet asked with wide eyes. He nodded, and Helen grabbed the car's phone, since Rick had put them all in a small limo, and called her home. Naruto nodded and added, Yep, and that is what I meant when I said I have secrets of my own. Lowering his hood and mask. And you followed me to the island since I first went there? Bob asked Nerda as he sat there. Not every time, he replied, turning to face Violet, who was seated beside him. I should not have kept my powers from you, and I lied about going to see an old friend, he murmured pitifully, glancing down at his feet. He looked as he felt a hand on his shoulder, and saw Violet grinning and saying, I forgive you. While making it clear to Nerdu, she stated hesitantly, to be honest, I was worried that your friend was an old girlfriend or something. But because of who he is, Nerdu remained unaware and appeared perplexed. Why would you be concerned about that? Fortunately, Bob was too preoccupied to hear them when he inquired. Violet blushed as she moved over to kiss his cheek in response to his query. I really like you, she said. For a while now. She was about to continue, but Nerda leaned over and kissed her on the lips, causing her eyes to widen with surprise and joy. Nerda grinned and leaned back a little, saying, I really like you too. Violet couldn't help but smile as she leaned on him a little, letting him put an arm around her. He noticed Dash's shocked and disgusted expression on his face as he looked at the other people. Helen was looking concerned as she listened to the phone, and Bob was still talking to Rick. Helen urged Bob to listen to her important message. I never called a replacement babysitter. Bob bent over to listen, and both of their eyes opened. The limo pulled up outside the Parr's house, and they all rushed inside before being paralyzed by syndrome. They all watched him hold Jack, whispering, the baby's sleeping. And then laughing. You took away my future. He frowned angrily and added, I'm just returning the favor. I'll be an excellent mentor, encouraging and supporting, so don't worry. Everything you weren't. Then he swung the family and Nerdo away before shattering the roof, laughing evilly as he flew to his hovering jet above him. And who knows, maybe he'll make a good sidekick in time. Bob, he's running away, Helen cried out in terror. We must take action. They all ran outside before looking confused when Syndrome stopped and dropped a bit. What's happening? Asked Helen. Looking closely, Nida saw Jack was now metal before turning back to normal. He then began to shake a lot, freaking Syndrome, before looking like a small red monster. Everyone watched, as Syndrome was getting beat up by the baby. Stop him, Bob, throw something! I could strike Jack. As they searched for an idea, Bob yelled. As Jack broke one of Syndrome's jet boots, sending the villain flying up uncontrolled and into the wing of his plane, Helen muttered, Throw me! Jack was dropped by accident as he returned to his normal. Bob, throw me! Bob grabbed up his wife and threw her to his infant without pausing to consider. She caught him and then stretched herself into a kind of parachute. When Syndrome eventually touched down in his aircraft, he said, This isn't over. I will get your son, eventually. When Bob saw his car, he picked it up and threw it without realizing that Nerda had climbed on it. Syndrome gasped when he saw the car crash into his plane, but he held on. Looking, he saw Nerda glaring at him before being picked up by his shirt. This is for everything you've done, he yelled, practically punching Syndrome out of the aircraft before jumping out himself. Syndrome was sucked by the jet's engine, which killed him and completely destroyed it. That's my girl, Helen remarked to her daughter, proud of her accomplishment, as they all huddled together while Violet created a powerful force field to protect them from the damaged jet. Nudo landed at the same time as Helen, however he caused some spider cracks due to his landing. Does this imply that we must relocate once more? As he studied the ruins of his family's home, Dash asked. I hope not, Nudo murmured, putting an arm around Violet's waist. Helen grinned, pleased that the two of them were together, while Bob merely complained and vowed to speak with Nerda later. Then, everyone's eyes opened when they noticed a young kid staring at them. When Bob went home, he recognized the youngster. That was really evil, the boy exclaimed, making everyone chuckle. After 3 months, The city has calmed down after everything that happened, all the damage has been repaired, and people are starting to support supers when they come back, even though Syndrome killed off most of them. At the moment, the family and Nerda were at Metroville Stadium, preparing to watch Dash run in a race, when Violet was talking to one of her new friends. With her newfound confidence, Nerda sneaked up behind her, put his arms around her, and spun her around with a laugh, causing her to squeal in surprise. He then placed her gently on the ground, and she turned around and kissed him, saying, "I was wondering if you wanted to go see a movie later this weekend?" he asked her. Violet smiled. "I'll buy the popcorn and you buy the tickets," she said, walking up the steps to her seat. Nerda followed after with a happy smile before sitting down with his arm around his girlfriend. The starting gun went off, signaling all the racers to start. The Parr family and Nerda began to shout to Dash, as he started to run faster, before shouting at him to slow down. None of them noticed the guy sitting next to them look at them weirdly. Dash got the message before running, just enough to be awarded second place. When the enormous drill stopped drilling into the ground as the family and Nerda were making their way to the car, its top opened to reveal a very dirty man wearing a hard hat and holding mechanical hands. "Look, the Underminer! I am always beneath you, but nothing is beneath me," he said over a speaker system. "I officially declare war on peace and happiness." The man went on talking while Bob slipped on his own mask after glancing at Nerda and his family, all of whom were wearing masks.